There may never be a greater craftsman than the Gobán Saor. It was said that he was so skilled that he could fashion a spear shaft in the time it took a man to draw breath, that he could forge a spearhead with just 3 strikes of a hammer, and the stories of his great buildings were completely unrivalled. He built castles for the 5 kings of Ireland, all the lords and all the chiefs. So it was no surprise that when the King of England heard about the Gobán Saor, he decided he wanted a castle built for himself. Before he sent word for the Gobán Saor, he thought though that, well, as soon as the castle was finished, that the Gobán Saor would go off and build another castle greater again. So the King of England decided that once the job was completed, he'd have the Gobán Saor put to death. That was his plan. And he sent for the Gobán Saor, who, upon hearing word, set out with just himself, his tools and his son. While on the road, he turned to his son and said, "Shorten the road for me." And knowing his father, the son started to tell him a story to shorten the journey. They travelled all day, and that night when it was time to take rest, they came across a home and asked for lodgings. In that home there was a father and a mother, and there were 2 daughters. The 2 daughters were about the same age as the Gobán's son, one with hair so dark, but she was so hurried and busy she seemed to never stop working, and her sister, whose hair was fair, and she sat idle by the fireplace with her hands crossed, content with doing nothing. The Gobán Saor said to his son that maybe one of these 2 sisters would make a good wife for him one day. So the next morning, over breakfast, the Gobán Saor gave the 2 young women advice. He said that if they ever wanted to find a good husband, they should take on 3 things. One was that they should keep the head of an old woman by the range. 2 was that every morning they should keep themselves warm for work. And the 3rd was that they could go to market with the skin of a sheep and come back with its price, but still have the sheepskin. Well, the Gobán Saor and the son continued off on their journey, and as they travelled they found plenty of opportunities to help people along the way. They came across a man who was trying to roof a circular structure, but with just 3 pieces of timber, none of them long enough to stretch across the opening. But the Gobán Saor solved the problem. He made notches in the tops of the 3 pieces of timber so that when he laid them against each other, they formed a triangle, and made it easy then to roof the structure. Continuing along the way, they came to a river where some men were trying to build a bridge across, but they had no nails and no pegs. Well, the Gobán Saor, with the help of his son, showed them how to overlay logs and planks in such a way that the more weight that was put on the bridge, the stronger it became. So stories of the Gobán Saor were now spreading across England. When he arrived at the king's land, the king greeted the 2 men, and he told them what he was looking for, and the Gobán Saor got to work straight away. This went on for a few days, the Gobán Saor and his son working as hard as they could, and the castle seemed to be rising out of the ground, growing almost organically and so quickly that people came just to watch these men work. And it wasn't too long before the castle was almost completed. Well, while taking a break before finishing up, a young servant girl came across to the Gobán Saor. She said that she was from Ireland herself, and that she'd come to England after falling in love with a man, but her loyalty still lay with Ireland. And she told the Gobán Saor the rumour that she'd heard that the king was going to have him put to death when he finished the building. Well, he thanked the Irish woman, and he went to the king after his break, and he said to the king that he had a ritual when completing any build, and relied on a charmed tool that he'd forgotten to pack to bring with him, and that he needed that to finish the job so that it would be a great structure and it would last and hold up. He said to the king that he wanted to send his son back to his home, to his wife, to collect the charmed tool and bring it back to him. And the king said no. He said he needed the tool to stay there and to continue working, that he'd send one of his own men back to Ireland, back to the wife of the Gobán Saor, and ask her for the tool. Well, the craftsman said that there was no way that his wife would give the tool to a stranger. It was too valuable, it was too important. But if the king sent back someone with royal blood, he's sure his wife would hand over the tool. So the English king decided to send his own son back. And the son set off and travelled across to Ireland, but the Gobán Saor had told him what to say to the wife. He said, when you meet her, to ask her for the tool, you're to say, Curanag an Calm. And when the English prince arrives at the wife of the Gobán Saor, that's exactly what he said. But she knew that exactly what it meant, that it was another one of her husband's riddles. And she took her husband's instruction. She fed and entertained and made the prince's stay so comfortable that he wouldn't want to leave. But when he did try to leave, the people were very insistent that he should stay until the Gobán Saor and his son were returned to Ireland. When the English king heard about this, he was furious. But there was nothing more that he could do. He needed his son back home, his only son. So, the Gobán Saor finished the job, and him and his son were released, and they were travelling off home. Good men of honour, though, I must say. To knowing that he was going to be put to death, he still completed the job, and an amazing castle it was. But on his way back to Ireland, on the way back to see his wife and have the prince released, he stopped off again at the home of the two daughters. Well, when he arrived, he went into the home and he met with the fair-haired daughter first, and he said to her, how did you get on with the 3 pieces of advice I gave you? She said, I didn't get on great at all. She said, I went to the churchyard and I dug up the body of an old woman and I took her head and I hung it by the range, by the cooker, but it scared everyone away and no one would stay. He said, well, that makes sense. She said, yeah. She says, and starting off my day and keeping myself warm for work, she said I was spinning yarn and I got so close to the fireplace that the yarn caught fire and it was completely ruined. Well, that was no good. She said, when I went down to the market with the sheepskin, I asked all the traders, I asked them if they would give me the price of the skin, but let me keep the skin anyway. And they all laughed at me, she said. Apart from this one man, she said, he said he'd give me the price of the sheepskin if I came to the tavern with him. And I didn't like the sound of that, she said. Well, the Gobán Saor to her, he said, well, at least you had the good sense not to go to the tavern. I hope your sister fared a little bit better. So he went and he spoke to the dark-haired sister. And when he went in to see her, she was in the kitchen, and over by the range sat this old woman in a rocking chair with a blanket over her lap. When the Gobán Saor asked the daughter about this woman, she said, yeah, she said to keep the head of an old woman by the range, she said, and I found this old relative of hers who had fallen on hard times, so we took her in. I put her in the warmest part of the home, and she talks to me, she tells me great stories, and I've learned a lot from her. The Gobán Saor was very happy with this. He said, well, how did you get on with the second piece? Well, she said, that was easy. She says, I'm always so busy. She says, so I get up in the morning, I'm working for as soon as my feet hit the ground, and I've no time to get cold or no time to complain. So I'm always kept warm if I'm kept busy. The Gobán Saor was very happy with this as well. But he asked her about the third piece of advice he gave and how she fared with that. And she said, well, that was a bit trickier, she says, and I'm not quite sure I did exactly what you said. She said, I went down to the market with the sheepskin. She says, and I stretched the skin out and I stretched it out and I pulled all of the wool from the sheepskin and I sold the wool and I got a very fair price. And I just brought the actual skin home with me. The Gobán Saor was delighted. She'd managed to find a way around all three tasks and come out on top. And he knew that this young woman was the right woman for his son. So he spoke to her father and her mother and he asked that they allow her to marry his son, and they were delighted. They are to be wedded as soon as they were ready. So the Gobán Saor sent word to his wife to come over for the festivities, that their son was going to get married, and asked that she bring the English prince with her as their guest. She arrived over. The wedding was a blast. Everyone had a great time. The English prince was still on a roll with having a great time, with the generosity of heart of these people. And when he returned home to his father, he only had good things to say, and he marvelled at this amazing creation that had been made by the Gobán Saor. And that's the story of the person who will probably always be Ireland's greatest craftsman.